The red envelope. Ethan Cole sat at the head of the dining table, pen balanced between his fingers, the final page of the divorce agreement laid out in front of him like a silent dare. The document bore 2 signatures already, his and Rachel's solicitors. Only 3 remained, one from her, one from his solicitor, and the witness line. It was all procedural now, clean, clinical. He'd chosen to do it here, in the house, with the blinds half drawn against the gray afternoon light, as if that might ease the weight of it. The kettle hissed behind him. The scent of Earl Grey had barely masked the sharpness of the printer ink. Rachel entered the kitchen with too much lightness in her step. She held something in her hands mug, perhaps, or a folded jumper, and then placed it carefully on the sideboard, noticed the papers, smiled too tightly. "I was going to wait," she said, voice pitched oddly high. "But I think now's the right time." Ethan didn't look up. He heard the rustle of her blouse as she sat across from him, just out of reach. "I'm pregnant," she said, laying the words down like fine china. There was a silence so clean you could hear the faint ticking of the clock above the hob. Then, almost too quickly, the doorbell rang. "Perfect timing," she added, standing. "Mom and Dad are here." Ethan blinked once, then again. The kettle clicked off. Eleanor swept in first, arms open, floral scarf trailing behind her like a banner. She smelled of perfume and fresh pastry. Behind her, Daniel Morgan entered with his usual careful precision, one hand adjusting the cuff of his sleeve, the other holding a narrow box of chocolate truffles. Eleanor spotted Rachel's face before anything else. "You told him!" she gasped, clapping her hands together. "Oh, darling, how wonderful!" Ethan stood slowly, placing the pen down beside the paper. Rachel turned to him, her eyes wide, damp with what seemed like emotion, but her shoulders were too still. "We're going to keep the baby," she said. Daniel didn't speak immediately. He cleared his throat, glanced at the table, then at Ethan. His eyes paused on the paperwork for a second too long. "Well," he said finally, voice even, "that changes things, doesn't it?" Ethan smiled, a small, polite thing, measured. "Yes," he said, "it certainly does." 3 weeks earlier, Ethan had walked into this same kitchen at 6:30 in the morning to find his favorite coffee mug. The one with the faded blue rim moved from the dish rack to the windowsill. He hadn't used it the night before. Rachel never used it. She said the handle was too narrow for her grip, but there it was, half a ring of dried liquid at the bottom, as though it had cooled there for hours. He said nothing. The next morning, the same mug had returned to the cupboard, cleaned, dried, placed precisely where it belonged, as if it had never moved at all. Rachel had taken to humming in the bathroom, a tune he didn't recognize, always stopping the moment he stepped into the hallway. When he mentioned it once lightly, over toast, she smiled and said she hadn't realized, then changed the subject. They still shared a bed, though only in the most technical sense. She faced the wall now, her legs curled towards the radiator. Ethan lay on his back, eyes open to the ceiling, counting the slow seconds between her breaths. She dreamt more often, murmured names he didn't know. It wasn't rage that built in him, but something colder, quieter, a sense of patterns emerging, a slow arrangement of details. He began to track the receipts. Rachel had never been particularly careful with her handbags. Every few days she'd leave one slouched open on the kitchen counter or draped over the banister. Ethan didn't snoop, not really. He glanced, a habit of observation. One morning, a receipt from a restaurant in Guilford dated 2 Thursdays ago. Dinner for 2, a bottle of wine. Her calendar had said Pilates. Another time, a dry cleaning slip for a man's blazer, size too large for Ethan, no brand he recognized. He kept everything, scanned them, filed them, created a folder on his laptop named Garden Plans, locked it with a password. It was never about proof, not at first. It was about understanding. Rachel had always been good at performance, at selecting the right moment to look wounded or hopeful or self-effacing. She'd mastered the art of the pause before a compliment, the tilt of her head when asking a favor. With her family, she played the role of the careful daughter, the one who'd been through so much and had finally found her footing. Ethan had played his role too, the calm, steady presence, the one who didn't interrupt when Eleanor launched into her stories, or when Daniel made his quiet little declarations of opinion as though they were facts. But lately, Ethan had noticed something new. Daniel had started avoiding eye contact, not overtly, just the faintest turn of the head when Ethan entered the room, or the way he checked his watch precisely 5 minutes into every conversation. Once, during Sunday lunch, Ethan made an offhand remark about the challenges of trust in modern marriages. Daniel had dropped his fork. Eleanor, of course, noticed nothing. She filled silences with anecdotes. She brought tarts. She offered Rachel foot rubs and herbal teas. She spoke of legacy and continuity. The baby announcement had been delivered like theater, but poorly rehearsed. Rachel's smile hadn't reached her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly. Not with fear, Ethan thought, but with effort. Maintaining a pose takes muscle. After the Morgans had left that evening, Rachel stood at the sink, rinsing cups that had already been cleaned. "You're quiet," she said. "I'm thinking," Ethan replied. "About the baby?" "Yes," he said, then added, "and about trust." She turned the tap off too quickly. Water splashed onto her blouse. She didn't react. Later that night, Ethan retrieved the divorce paperwork from the bin, where Rachel had tucked it beneath the kitchen towel. He smoothed the pages out, stacked them neatly, and slid them back into the drawer beside the pens. He wasn't ready to destroy anything yet. Instead, he went to the study, sat in the dark, and opened his laptop. The folder was still there. Garden plans. Inside, the scans of receipts, a timeline spreadsheet, screenshots of Rachel's Instagram stories against the GPS timestamps of her messages, all neatly collated. He added a new file, a scan of the restaurant receipt. Then he made a note. Week 17, announcement, eyes wet, smiled too soon. Daniel wouldn't meet my gaze. He closed the laptop, sat still. The house creaked faintly. Upstairs, Rachel flushed the toilet. Ethan rested his hands on the desk. They were perfectly steady. The kind of stillness that came not from peace, but from calculation. He had always believed in the quiet power of precision. And now, with the arc of a pregnancy laid out in front of him like a roadmap, he had time. Time to observe. Time to plan. The mug was still damp when Ethan picked it up. Rachel had left it on the windowsill, half full of lukewarm chamomile, its rim smudged with faint gloss. He turned it slowly in his hand, then tilted it over the sink and watched the tea spiral down the drain. The handle was warm from the morning sun, but the lip of it, where her mouth had pressed, felt cooler. He wrapped it in a clean kitchen towel, slipped it into an old shoebox, and carried it out to the car without a word. Rachel was upstairs, humming, a low, tuneless murmur, the kind she used when performing domestic calm. Ethan didn't disturb her. He closed the front door softly, started the car, and pulled away from the curb with the quiet deliberation of someone backing out of more than just a driveway. The clinic was just over 40 minutes away, a discreet unit tucked between a dental practice and a physiotherapy center in a business park with identical gray facades. He'd chosen it carefully. High client ratings, ISO-certified labs, no tabloid affiliations. The kind of place that didn't ask unnecessary questions, but offered typed receipts and discreetly marked envelopes. He parked at the far end of the lot and sat in the car for a moment, letting the engine tick cool. In the passenger seat, the shoebox rested on a folded copy of the local paper. He checked his phone. No new messages. Rachel had sent a photo that morning, a bird's-eye shot of her breakfast tray with sliced strawberries and a caption about, "Nurturing both of us now, XX." Ethan had double-tapped it, as expected. Inside the clinic, the receptionist greeted him without looking up. She was mid-sentence on a phone call, nodding at the form on the counter. Ethan filled it out with his usual precision, pausing only at the line marked "Relationship to alleged father." He left it blank. A technician collected the sample. She wore blue gloves and a patient, neutral expression. When she lifted the mug from the towel, her hands moved with the same care Ethan recognized in himself. A reverence not for the object, but for the consequences it might carry. "Results will be couriered in 5 to 7 working days," she said. "You'll receive a reference number by email. Do you want a hard copy as well?" "Yes," Ethan said. She nodded. "We post them in sealed envelopes, plain packaging." "Good." Back in the car, Ethan sat for a moment, watching a sparrow worry at a discarded crisp packet near the curb. He tapped a note into his phone. Clinic drop-off complete, reference code pending. Then he drove. At home, Rachel had left a vase of fresh tulips on his desk, yellow and white, slightly drooping. A card leaned against the glass. Thinking of you. Love. Us. The handwriting was hers, but looser than usual, with a flourish on the final loop of the as. He photographed the card, filed the image in his folder, and moved the vase to the windowsill. Later that afternoon, while folding laundry in the bedroom, Ethan spotted a crumpled paper slip in the pocket of Rachel's dressing gown. He'd reached in to straighten the seam and felt the edge of it, warm from her body heat. He unfolded it carefully. It was a receipt for a private ultrasound, not NHS, dated nearly 6 weeks before the public announcement, which would have placed the scan at around week 11, not 17, as Rachel had insisted when Eleanor pressed her for details over mimosas. He held the receipt up to the light. The logo was embossed. The address matched a boutique clinic in town known for offering bonding scans with optional video keepsakes. Ethan had never seen one. He placed the receipt flat on the desk and scanned it, then added it to the timeline. He adjusted the week numbers accordingly. The discrepancy wasn't massive, but it opened a gap wide enough for motive. That evening, while Rachel was showering, Ethan glanced at her phone as it buzzed on the counter. A message preview blinked briefly before fading. Just a snippet. Needs to feel authentic, not polished, more like you were caught in a moment. He didn't recognize the number, no name attached. He left the phone where it was. In the following days, Ethan resumed his role with choreographed precision. He attended Eleanor's afternoon teas, where Rachel was always given the softest chair and the tallest glass. He rubbed her back when she feigned discomfort, fetched ginger biscuits, and nodded solemnly during conversations about nursery paint colors and vitamin supplements. He offered quiet affirmations, never overplaying. At the church committee meeting, he joked about becoming a nappy sommelier and was rewarded with polite laughter. But at night, he sat in the study and reviewed the folder. There was a rhythm to it now, a steady build, the mug, the receipt, the text, the contradictions layered like sediment. None of it proved anything alone, but together they formed a contour, a shape Ethan could feel even if it wasn't fully visible yet. On the 5th morning, a courier van pulled up just after 9. Ethan watched from the kitchen window as the man walked briskly up the path, envelope in hand. Plain packaging, no logos, just his name in block capitals, typed precise. He opened the door before the bell rang. "Mr. Cole?" "Yes." "Signature, please." He signed. The man nodded and walked back to the van. Ethan closed the door and carried the envelope to the study. It was heavier than he'd expected. Inside, a smaller white envelope, sealed, and a folded letter with the lab's crest and disclaimer: "This report is provided for informational purposes only and should not be used in legal proceedings without appropriate chain of custody documentation." He sat. The envelope made a faint crackle as he broke the seal. There were 2 pages. The second was a breakdown of alleles and genetic markers, dense with numbers and acronyms. The first was simpler. A summary. Based on the DNA profiles obtained from the alleged father and the child sample derived from the submitted item, the probability of paternity is 0%. Below that, in bold, exclusion. Mr. Ethan Cole is not the biological father. The date of the test was listed clearly. The reference number matched the email. The sample description, ceramic mug, lip contact, confirmed the chain. At the bottom, a signature from the lab director. Ethan stared at the page. Then he flipped to the back, where a single line had been added under additional notes. Comparison to known sample of Mr. Daniel K. Morgan indicates a probability of paternity exceeding 99.9%. He read it twice, then again. The report didn't blur. His hands didn't shake. The air didn't shift. But something inside him did. Not surprise. That had passed weeks ago, quietly. This was something colder. He slid the pages back into the envelope, resealed it, and placed it in the second drawer of his desk. Then he opened the laptop. The folder was still there. Garden plans. He created a subfolder, named it Foundation, and began to build. The printer gave a soft whir as the first sheet slid out, crisp and white, the lab's letterhead stark at the top. Ethan stood over it, arms folded, watching. He'd adjusted the margins to preserve the formatting, made sure the serial number was visible in every copy. Each one bore the date, not today's, but the date the sample had been processed. That was the point. The truth hadn't just arrived, it had been sitting quietly for weeks. He'd chosen a heavier paper stock. Not glossy, but thick enough to feel deliberate. He wanted the weight to register in the hands of whoever opened it. Not just a document, a reckoning. 10 copies, each sealed in a red envelope, the kind Eleanor used for Christmas cards. He'd found them in the sideboard drawer, left over from last year. He liked the symbolism. Festive, almost cheerful, until opened. He laid them out in a neat row across the desk. The color reminded him of theater curtains just before the play begins. That moment of hush. He reached for the folded divorce papers, still sitting where he'd left them 3 months earlier. He didn't unfold them, just slid them into the bottom drawer and pushed it shut with a soft click. "I was the man who walked away," he said aloud, voice low. He looked at his reflection in the darkened monitor. Not anymore, no more quiet. Only the question, how they pay. The printer tray rattled as the last copy dropped into place. He didn't touch the envelopes again. Not yet. Let them cool. He moved to the small cabinet by the window and poured a measure of whiskey. No ice. The glass clinked against the bottle's neck. He took a sip, then another. It tasted clean and sharp. Not celebratory, not mournful, just necessary. Downstairs, the house was still. Rachel had taken the car earlier, claiming errands. Her voice had been light, but her eyes hadn't met his. Lately she'd started humming in the kitchen, a tune he didn't recognize, always just under her breath, like a child trying to distract themselves from guilt. He hadn't asked where she went anymore. There was no need. He checked his watch. Nearly 6. Time to go. The bar sat off a ring road, wedged between a tire shop and a shuttered bakery. It had once been a pub, then a steakhouse, then something themed involving darts and neon. Now, it was just a low-lit box with sports playing on silent TVs and the smell of old fryer oil clinging to the carpet. Tom was already at the back, nursing a pint and a bowl of peanuts. He glanced up as Ethan approached, then down at the envelopes tucked under his arm. Tom's brow lifted. That's either a very specific Christmas list or something I shouldn't be involved in. Ethan sat opposite. "I need a favor." Tom leaned back, folding his arms. "You do realize that's how every terrible plan begins." Ethan slid one of the envelopes across the table. Tom didn't open it, just looked at it, then at him. "What's in it?" "Proof," Ethan said, "of something they thought they'd buried." Tom waited. Ethan let the silence stretch. Then he said, "It's Daniel. He's the father." There was no flicker of disbelief, just a slow exhale through Tom's nose. "Bloody hell. The test's clean, chain of custody's solid. I've got the original, plus these. Highlighted the date and serial. No room for denial." Tom reached for the envelope, but still didn't open it. "And you want what? Delivery?" "I want it to land where it matters. Quietly, precisely. No leaks until the right moment." Tom gave a dry chuckle. "You always were the surgical type." "I need you to manage the timing," Ethan said. "You know the guest list. Who's on which committee, who turns up early, who stays late. Eleanor will be speaking. She always does. There's a gap right before the cake. That's the window." Tom looked at him properly now. "You're staging it." "Yes." Tom tapped the envelope against the table, once. "And after?" "I walk away. Nothing else. No interviews, no follow-up. Just that moment." "Ethan," Tom's voice softened. "This isn't just a public mess. You're talking about detonating a family in front of half the village." "They already did," Ethan said. "I'm just turning on the lights." Tom's gaze dropped. He turned the envelope in his hands. "How long have you known?" "Long enough?" Another silence. Finally, Tom said, "You know they'll say you did it out of spite, that you couldn't handle the divorce, that you're trying to ruin her." Ethan nodded. "They'll say a lot of things." "And Rachel. She made her choices." Tom gave a long sigh, then tucked the envelope into his coat. "All right, I'll help." Ethan nodded once. "Thank you." "But you should know," Tom added. "This doesn't end tidy, even when it works." "It's not meant to," Ethan said. "It's meant to be true." They left separately. Outside, the wind had picked up, tugging at the corners of a torn advertising banner, flapping against the side of the building. Ethan stood for a moment under the flickering security light, watching the clouds churn overhead. Then he turned up his collar and walked back to the car. The red envelope sat beside him on the passenger seat, silent and waiting. Tools, not symbols. Each one a pin in a carefully drawn map. each one a blade. Back home, Rachel was already in bed, the bedroom door cracked but dark. He didn't stop, just went to the study, placed the remaining envelopes in a folder, and slid it into the satchel he'd used for the shower. He checked the clock. Then he sat. The house was quiet again. But inside that silence, something had shifted. The man who'd once measured his words, who'd once accepted the slow corrosion of truth for the sake of peace, he was gone. And in his place sat someone colder, sharper, certain, seen and stage. The morning of the baby shower broke with a brittle kind of brightness. Sunlight without warmth, slicing through the hedgerows and pooling against the village hall's flint walls. Ethan arrived just after 8, hours before the guests were due, parking discreetly behind the bins where the caterers would later unload. The red envelope was sealed and flat in the inside pocket of his jacket, its weight unchanging. He didn't touch it. Inside, the air smelled faintly of varnish and last week's tea. The hall had been cleared the night before, but someone had already wheeled in the urn and set out the mismatched cups Eleanor insisted gave charm. Ethan moved through the space deliberately, unzipping the satchel and removing the printed ultrasound shots Eleanor had asked him to bring. He placed one on each table, slightly askew so they looked casually placed, not staged. The grainy black and white image, cropped to show just enough curve and shadow to suggest a future, stared up from every setting. The flower delivery arrived just after 9. Ethan signed for the boxes himself, tipping the driver more than necessary and carrying the arrangements in armfuls to the front of the room. He positioned them carefully, white roses with pale eucalyptus, arranged in low bowls, flanking the main table and the lectern Eleanor had insisted be used for speeches. He adjusted the chairs next, shifting the front row subtly so Eleanor's assigned seat would be center stage, directly across from where the microphone would stand. A theater without curtain, but with cast, cues, and audience. By 10:30, the caterers were setting up, and Ethan had already settled the final invoice. He made a point of greeting each vendor warmly, slipping them extra notes to ensure the schedule stayed tight. No delays, no substitutions. He didn't need control of the whole day, just the rhythm of the reveal. Rachel arrived just before 11, cheeks flushed from the cold and smile already in place. She wore a pale peach dress that softened her outline, one hand resting on her stomach with gentle emphasis. Eleanor trailed behind her, arms full of pastel bunting and a clipboard listing everything from canapé timing to speech order. Daniel was absent. When Ethan asked, Eleanor waved a hand. "He's picking up the photographer, darling. She's coming in from Chichester." Ethan nodded, making mental note. One more piece in motion. By midday, the hall was humming. Alice Hart had arrived early, as expected, and was already filming slow pans of the decorations on her phone, narrating in a breathy whisper. "Honestly, it's so beautifully done, like something out of a magazine. Look at those little cupcakes. Did you see the tiny rattles on top? Oh my God." Her voice drifted through the space like perfume, pleasant at first, then cloying. Ethan watched her discreetly, noting the livestream app already open, and her phone's external mic clipped to her lapel. She hadn't brought a +1, which meant her full attention would be on documenting. Perfect. The photographer, a slim woman with cropped silver hair and a quiet smile, arrived with Daniel just after lunch. She moved professionally, testing light angles and muttering about white balance. Ethan offered her a coffee and pointed out the best vantage points. "That corner catches the most natural light," he said, gesturing to the place opposite Eleanor's seat. "You'll get good expressions from there." "Lovely," she said, adjusting her lens. "I'll take Candid's mostly natural moments. Those always come out best." He smiled. "Exactly what we want." At 1:15, Tom arrived. He wore a dark blazer and no tie, eyes scanning the room like a man looking for exits. Ethan saw the tension in his shoulders, the way he nodded too quickly when Rachel greeted him, the way he avoided Eleanor's gaze altogether. Tom took up his post near the bar, where he could see the lectern and the main table clearly. He didn't look at Ethan. The speeches were scheduled for 2:30. Eleanor had insisted on a program, a welcome toast, a few anecdotes from Rachel's friends, then Ethan's remarks as the supportive father-to-be, followed by a closing blessing from Daniel. It was all theater, and every cue mattered. At 2:15, Ethan stepped into the corridor off the main hall to check his notes. The air was cooler there, and the hum of conversation dulled behind the doors. He was slipping the cue cards back into his pocket when he heard footsteps. Tom appeared, jaw tight, hands in fists. "We need to talk," he said low. Ethan nodded once and followed him down the narrow corridor, past the cloakroom and towards the fire exit. When Tom stopped, he turned, blocking the hallway with his body. "You're still going through with it?" "Yes." Tom exhaled sharply. "Ethan, listen to me. You're about to detonate this entire family, in front of neighbors, friends, half the bloody town. You think people are going to see you as principled? They'll see a man who couldn't handle being left. A man who humiliated a pregnant woman in public. She's not pregnant with my child. That's not the point, and you bloody know it." Ethan said nothing. Tom's eyes flicked to Ethan's jacket. "Where is it?" "In my pocket. I could take it now, rip it up, throw it in the bin. We walk back in, you make some vague speech, and no one gets hurt. Too late for that." "Ethan!" Tom stepped closer, voice dropping. "This isn't just gossip. You're using medical records. There are laws, chain of custody questions. If they want to fight back, they will. And you'll be the one who looks like a lunatic with a vendetta. I've considered that. And," Ethan met his gaze, "I'm prepared to pay the price." Tom shook his head. "Why? Why not just walk away quietly? Let them rot in their own mess. Because they won't. They'll rewrite it. They'll turn it into a story where I abandoned her, where Daniel stepped in nobly. Eleanor will host dinners about it. Rachel will cry on cue. And I'll be the shadow they paint on the wall." Tom's voice cracked. "So what, you burn the house down so no one else can live in it? I turn on the lights. What burns is their own doing." Silence stretched between them. Then Tom's hand moved towards Ethan's jacket. Ethan didn't flinch. "Don't." Tom froze. His fingers curled against his palm. "If you do this," he said quietly, "there's no going back. You'll lose them. You'll lose this town. You'll lose whatever's left of your life here. I know. Then don't." Ethan reached into his pocket, withdrew the envelope, and held it up. "This is the truth. I'm not asking for vindication, just honesty." Tom stared at it. His throat bobbed. "You used to be the calm one, the one who waited things out. I waited long enough." Tom looked away, his jaw tight. Then he stepped back, rubbing a hand over his mouth. "I can't watch you do it," he said, "but I won't stop you." Ethan nodded. Tom turned and walked away, shoulders hunched, hands trembling as he passed back into the main hall. Ethan stood alone a moment longer, the envelope cool in his hand. Then he slipped it back into his pocket, straightened his jacket, and stepped into the light. The room was already in full bloom when Ethan stepped through the side doors. Pale bunting hung along the walls like wilted garlands, and the tables were littered with pastel cupcakes and tiny jars of lemon curd. Eleanor stood near the center, shepherding guests with a hostess's precision, her voice rising in warm bursts above the low hum of chatter. Rachel sat in a cushioned chair beneath a paper sign that read, "Mum to Be," her hands folded neatly over the swell of her dress, her smile tight but practiced. Daniel stood nearby, one hand in his pocket, the other nursing a glass of elderflower cordial. Ethan moved through the room like a current beneath still water nodding, murmuring polite greetings, invisible in his familiarity. Alice caught his eye near the buffet table and gave a delighted little wave, her phone already in hand, filming the bunting with breathless narration. Just in time, Eleanor beamed as he approached. "We were about to start the speeches. Rachel's cousin is still stuck on the A27, but we can't wait forever, can we?" He smiled. "Would it be all right if I said a few words before the toasts?" Her face lit up. "Of course. That would be lovely." She turned to signal the room, her rings catching the light. "Everyone, if I could have your attention, Ethan would like to say a few words." The noise dropped to a hush. Chairs scraped, glasses were set down. Rachel looked up sharply, blinking. Ethan stepped forward, his hands loose at his sides, and scanned the room. There were over 30 people packed into the hall, neighbors, colleagues, old school friends, the local vicar. A photographer crouched near the back, adjusting his lens. Alice edged closer, camera phone raised. He cleared his throat softly. "Thank you all for coming. It means a great deal to Rachel and me to see so many familiar faces here today. This baby," he glanced at Rachel, who offered a tight-lipped smile, "has already brought so much attention, so much anticipation." A few guests chuckled lightly. Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with a lace-trimmed handkerchief. I had prepared something longer, Ethan continued, reaching into his jacket pocket, but I think it's best to let someone else speak for me. He pulled out the envelope, a red one, bright and blood-rich against the pale decor. He turned to Eleanor, offered it with both hands. Would you do me the honor? She hesitated, eyes flicking between him and the envelope, then took it with a gracious little nod, the same expression she used when accepting floral arrangements or compliments about her garden. Ethan stepped back. Eleanor opened the flap delicately, as if it might contain a poem, or perhaps a voucher for a spa day. She withdrew the sheet inside, stark white, it professionally printed, clinical in its formatting. She read the first line aloud without thinking. Paternity Analysis Report, serial number KQ-ZART0009781. Tested alleged father, Ethan Cole. Result, excluded as biological father. Silence fell like a dropped plate. Someone near the front let out a small, reflexive laugh, quickly stifled. Rachel's face froze, her mouth parting without sound. Daniel shifted, his glass lowering slowly. Eleanor blinked down at the page, her lips moving as she read silently. Then her voice came again, brittle now. Confirmed biological match, Daniel K. Morgan. Date of test, 3rd of June. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a fork. Alice's phone was still raised, but now her expression had changed. No longer amused, but hungry. Rachel stood abruptly. Stop. Don't. Daniel took a step forward. That's enough, he said, but his voice was thin, unconvincing. Ethan said nothing. He simply stood there, hands folded, watching. Daniel turned to him, color draining from his face. How long have you known? Ethan's reply was quiet, but clear. Since the 3rd of June. A murmur rose, low and stunned. The date landed like a stone in a pond, sending ripples through every memory of the past few months. The garden lunches, the hospital visits, the carefully staged photographs. Rachel's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes flicked to her mother, who was still holding the paper like it might catch fire, then to Daniel, then to Ethan. You planned this, she said, voice hoarse. You brought them all here just to tell the truth, Ethan said evenly. The photographer didn't move, frozen in place with his camera half raised. Alice had already lowered her phone, her fingers flying over the screen. It would be online within moments. Daniel tried to speak, but no words came. He looked at Eleanor, whose face had gone paper white, and then back to Ethan. You just stood there? For months? Pretending? Ethan's gaze never wavered. You weren't pretending? Daniel's lips moved, but no sound emerged. A man near the back coughed. Someone else stood and quietly made for the door. Rachel sat down heavily, her hands trembling. You've ruined everything, she whispered. You vindictive. No, Ethan said softly. I just stopped playing along. The hall was splintering now, guests murmuring, some rising, others still frozen. The air had changed, sharp and brittle, like the moment before a storm breaks. Eleanor dropped the paper onto the table, as if it burned. Perhaps we should all step outside for a moment. No one moved. Tom stood by the edge of the buffet, his face unreadable. He didn't look at Ethan. Rachel stood again, swaying slightly. You think this makes you righteous? You think this makes you the victim? Ethan tilted his head. I think it makes me free. Another guest left, then another. The photographer, perhaps sensing the shift in mood, began packing up silently. Alice's phone pinged, then again. Her eyes widened as she read the notifications. It's already on Facebook, she said quietly. Someone's tagged the village group. Ethan turned toward the door. Behind him, Rachel's voice cracked. You'll be hated for this. He paused, hand on the handle. I already was, he said without turning. Then he stepped out into the cold. The air outside was sharp, laced with the scent of wood smoke and damp leaves. The sky hung low and gray, the kind that made you pull your coat tighter without realizing. Ethan walked to the edge of the car park and stopped beside a low stone wall. Inside, the shouting had begun. He could hear Eleanor's voice rise, brittle and panicked, Daniel's deeper tone cutting in, then Rachel's shrill protest, and the scatter of hurried footsteps. He didn't look back. From here, he could see the village green beyond the hedgerow, quiet and indifferent. A few birds pecked at the frost-tinged grass. Somewhere, a dog barked. Ethan exhaled slowly, the breath ghosting out before him. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a second envelope, brown this time, sealed and unmarked. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of it. Inside, it held the ultrasound photo, the one Rachel had pressed into his palm the day she announced the pregnancy. Eyes glossy, voice trembling with rehearsed joy. He slipped it back into his pocket. Behind him, the door banged open. Tom stepped out, his expression drawn. "Well," he said after a moment, "that'll do it." Ethan didn't answer. "They're going to come for you. Legally, socially, you know that." "I know." Tom looked at him, really looked. "You all right?" Ethan considered. "Not really." Tom nodded. "Didn't think so." A pause, then quieter. "You should go, before it gets uglier." Ethan gave a small nod. He walked to his car, unlocked it, and slid inside. As he started the engine, he glanced once more toward the hall. Through the windows, he could see movement gestures, faces turned away, the shape of a family imploding. He pulled out slowly, tires crunching over the gravel, and drove away without looking back. Silence. The curtains in the inn's lounge were salt-stiffened and faded, the kind of heavy fabric that once aspired to grandeur, but had long since surrendered to the sea air. Ethan sat in a battered armchair near the window, mug cooling in his hands, watching the tide pull away from the shore. The sound of the waves was constant but uneven, like breathing from something too large to ever see fully. He'd driven through the night, arriving just before dawn. The receptionist hadn't asked questions. It just slid over a brass key on a leather fob and muttered something about the breakfast hours. The place was mostly empty this time of year. A few retirees, maybe a couple chasing off-season prices. No one who would know his name. He hadn't unpacked. The envelope was still in his coat pocket, creased now at the corners. After breakfast, he walked to the village post office, still with its red door and fading lottery sign, and stood outside for 10 minutes before it opened. The woman behind the counter, cheerful in that practiced rural way, accepted the package without comment. He'd written no return address, just a name and a street. Morgan. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Inside the envelope, the ultrasound photo, folded once. On its back, in his handwriting, just 3 words. "Not mine, yours." He'd considered more, a paragraph, a monologue, but anything longer would have felt like performance, and he was done with that. Let the silence say what needed saying. Back at the inn, the kettle hissed and clicked off. He made tea without thinking, hands moving through the motions automatically. Outside, gulls wheeled over the surf, their cries sharp against the wind. He sat again, the cup untouched beside him, and let the quiet settle. The phone calls started that evening. Rachel's number blinked across the screen first, then a withheld number, then her again. He let them ring out. No voicemails, just silence. By the next morning, a text. Short. "We need to talk." Another followed. "Please." Then, "Ethan, this can't be how it ends." He didn't reply. The local paper arrived at the inn on the 3rd morning, folded neatly on the reception counter, beside a bowl of peppermints and a stack of takeaway menus. Ethan skimmed the front page, then stopped at page 5. A column titled "Of Manners and Masks" by a name he recognized, Judith Alton, a fixture of village events and seasonal fundraisers. The piece didn't name anyone, but it spoke of the fragility of appearances, of truths once whispered, now shouted, and the cost of performance when the curtain tears mid-scene. He left the paper open on the table, the peppermint untouched. Tom's message came 2 days later, just one line. "They're circling. You were right." No sign-off, no follow-up. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things not said, messages unsent, calls unanswered, invitations that would no longer come. Alice Hart's posts, though, filled the space where silence might have lived. The baby shower clip had gone up within the hour, captioned with a single wide-eyed emoji, and was shared faster than anyone could ask her to take it down. It wasn't just the envelope moment. Someone had caught Eleanor's gasp, Daniel's stillness, Rachel's pale, frozen smile, the sound of a chair scraping back. It had all played out in the background, like theater. Alice's page blurred into group chats, then into Facebook mums groups, then into something wider. The comments were vicious in that particular English way, polite, clipped, and devastating. By the end of the week, the Morgans had taken themselves off social media entirely. Eleanor's Instagram, once a patchwork of floral centerpieces and charity tees, went dark. Daniel's LinkedIn profile, once so carefully curated, was stripped of affiliations. Rachel's accounts vanished altogether. Someone posted that the Morgans had canceled their summer garden party. Another that Daniel had withdrawn from a local business consortium. A third claimed Eleanor had been seen in tears outside the butcher's, though no one could confirm if it was grief or just the cold. Ethan didn't ask. He didn't need to. He walked the shoreline each morning, the wind flattening his hair, the salt sting catching in his throat. He didn't wear headphones, let the sea do the talking. One afternoon, a woman at the inn, early 60s, silver bob, sensible coat, asked if he was writing something. "You've got the look," she said. That quiet stare. He smiled politely and said no. She left him alone after that. The ultrasound photo had been the last thread. He'd thought it might feel like a full stop. It didn't. It was just space. A clean page, maybe, but still blank. He thought sometimes about what Rachel had said at the door. "You'll be hated for this." But hate wasn't what lingered. It was something quieter, the kind of absence you only noticed when you reached for something and found the air instead. He'd kept his agency. That mattered. He hadn't shouted, hadn't begged, hadn't played the part they'd written for him. He'd chosen the moment, the method, the witnesses. He'd made sure the truth landed with the weight it deserved. But he'd also stepped outside the frame. People didn't know how to place him now. He wasn't the wronged husband, not publicly. Not in the way that earned sympathy. He was the man who'd staged a reveal, who'd used the moment, who'd made the private public. And in a village like theirs, that kind of control was unnerving. He'd broken the rules of quiet suffering. And so, the invitations stopped. The small nods at the bakery, the wave from the neighbor's window, the recognition in the school car park. Though he wouldn't be there anymore. He had no plan for what came next, just the sea and the empty days. That might change, or not. He stayed one more night, then checked out without fuss, left the key on the counter, nodded to the receptionist, and walked to his car with the wind at his back. As he pulled onto the narrow road out of the village, he passed a wooden sign weathered by years of salt and rain. "Thank you for visiting," it read. Ethan drove on without slowing.